Let's say hypothetically, there were no borders at all. We could move about in the world as we wanted, and we could also have the privilege of calling ourselves world citizens. Wow, that would be a wonderful idea, right? But unfortunately, that would be an escape from reality. Because as we all know, we all are surrounded by nation states. We are members of nations and we are passionate about that identity of being a citizen of a nation. So it's important in that context to understand, why did this concept of a nation ever arise? How did that process come about, and why did this feeling of nationalism come into being? That is exactly what we are going to try and dissect in this chapter, Rise of Nationalism in Europe. That's the first chapter of your history textbook, which is going to be covered in two parts. Hi there, I'm Anirudh Naveed. In this video, we shall first be understanding the very concept of a nation. What does it mean? Why is it so important in today's discourse? Number two, we look at how the French Revolution contributed towards the evolution of this idea of a nation. Number three, we look at how nationalism emerged in Europe, especially the events in the 19th century. And lastly, in this video, there's an extra segment, a bonus segment for you all, which is called #course correction, when I'll be giving you a nugget of information and a question that is beyond what is given in your textbook, but very much linked with the contents of this chapter. So look forward to that as well. Without any further ado, let's begin. So let's take some time and dwell on this concept of a nation. Firstly, nations are hard to define, considering that they're relatively a new phenomenon, evolving only in the 18th and 19th centuries, and also that they're ridden with abstractions. But there are multiple theories that float around, and many scholars have commented on this. So for instance, Ernst Renan, who's been quoted in your textbook, I'll just paraphrase what he said. He says that nations are formed out of having a collective imagination about the past and a will to move together in the future as well, right? And on similar lines, Ambedkar, our own scholar, says that nations evolve out of a consciousness of unity, right? And you have another scholar like Benedict Anderson who claims that nations are like imagined communities. So one thing that you can understand is the premise is that a nation can only come about through mental processes. That is, people, when they feel to get a sense of togetherness, that is what manifests later on into territorial integrity and national integrity. So the national feeling only comes with a desire to be together, even though you may not know each other. You may live very far off, but there's something, there is a history, there is a deeper cultural reckoning that keeps you together. So that is what a nation is all about. Now we'll move on to the specific events in Europe that brought the concept of nation into being. The French Revolution, we all know about its importance in Europe and world history. But how did it contribute towards this concept of nation state? Now, for that we have to understand about Napoleon Bonaparte and the way he carried out his politics. He was someone who believed in conquering as much territory as possible, in ensuring that the message of democracy, the message of the French Revolution transmits itself across Europe as a whole. That was his aim. And in the process, he began cultivating this identity of a nation, this identity of, people being one, being, united across this vast swath of territory. Now, how was that done? This was done through a variety of processes. The first one was that of using terminologies like la patrie, la citoyen, this is your fatherland, you are a citizen of this nation. So gradually people are beginning to associate themselves with a national identity. Then you also had a national flag, national anthems, people singing hymns and songs together. You had emblems, national emblems coming about. So this way people are coming together and feeling that, okay, there are few things that all of us can associate ourselves with, right? Alongside, Napoleon also introduced something called as the Napoleonic Code of 1804. Now what did this do? Three major things. Firstly, it abolished privileges based on birth. This is something that was a ramification of once the Bourbon dynasty came to an end. So to bring an end to this whole concept of dynastism. The second was to ensure equality before law. And the third was securing the right to property. Alongside, there were a slew of administrative changes that were also fostered. And this was mainly like, bringing about a common taxation system, abolishing serfdom, ensuring that people can travel from one region to another very smoothly and seamlessly. Then a common system of weights and measures. So businessmen were pretty happy that finally, after all these divisions and all these ethnic divisions that always proliferated, gradually we are cultivating one system that could keep people united and would ensure that trade also takes place very, very seamlessly and wonderfully. That was how a variety of administrative changes actually facilitated a sense of nationalism. Now, this is where we come to this whole, the lopside and the pitfall of all these changes that were fostered by Napoleon. One major pitfall was that he gradually became dictatorial. In the sense, people they initially accepted him and these changes in the vein that, okay, they might bring about a lot of reform and change. But Napoleon's actions belied them because he introduced a very stringent taxation system. There was forced conscription into the army. People were being forced to learn a particular language and all their other identities were being disregarded. So this way there was a gradual hostility that was being cultivated, and this did not bode well for Napoleon, as was seen later on as well. So that is how the sense of nationalism as espoused by Napoleon gradually fell, it did not succeed and fell aside, while you had Europe actually ensuring that it thrived for the future. Now let's look into the making of nationalism in Europe. So we need to understand that Europe as a society had multiple divisions. There were a lot of ethnic divisions and differences, and Europe in the 19th century was divided into a lot of kingdoms, a lot of cantons. And this was particularly seen in empires like the Habsburg Empire, that had provinces like the Alpine provinces that were predominantly German speaking, but you also had provinces like in Italian speaking provinces like in Venetia or Lombardy. Now this ensured that there were divisions, and naturally when these divisions happened, to create a sense of unity, to create a sense of nationalism was a difficult and arduous task. And to understand how nationalism gained credence in Europe, we have to look back at how there was a class transition in the 19th century. So, in the beginning of the 19th century, a landed aristocracy dominated in Europe. Now, what is a landed aristocracy? A landed aristocracy refers to a class of people who are affluent and who own a lot of land. They are accorded with a lot of privileges. You can call them nobles. Now, this class of aristocracy was gradually moved out of the people who straddled power, and you had a new class of those who were contributing towards the Industrial Revolution who came up, and this went on to be the middle class. Before, Eastern Europe was largely cultivated, the land was cultivated by serfs, while in Western Europe you had tenants and smaller cultivators who would cultivate. But gradually what happened was that once the Industrial Revolution began to take a hold over the whole of Europe, initially in the 18th century it was just restricted to England, but in the 19th century it went on to incorporate France and Germany in its way. That is when you had a whole new group of people. For instance, you had industrialists, you had businessmen, you had traders. All of them suddenly entered the mix, and that is how there was a class transition. And it was these very people who began to forge this national identity. And that is important to understand, because it is this class struggle that ultimately led to more demands and revolutions over the course of the 19th century. So I'll briefly look at the meaning of this term called liberalism. It's much in vogue today, but it also had a great role to play in the evolution of the phenomenon of nationalism. Now, liberalism comes from the word liber, which in Latin means free. Now, as we all know, it implies people should be free, they should be free to pursue what they want, they should have the liberty to perform any actions, and there should be equality. In a sense, people should be treated equally by the higher authorities. Now, how was liberalism viewed in the 19th century? Number one, it meant that there should be it should be a consent by the people, in the sense that it should be a representative government. There should be a representative government. There should be an abolition of all autocracy and all clerical privileges, in the sense that those who are being entitled to privileges owing to their dynasty or something of their past, that all should be eradicated. Number three, that there should be equality before the law. And fourth and most importantly was the inviolability of private property, in the sense everyone should be entitled to owning property. That is something that was, that's how it evolved. However, there were a lot of discrepancies as well. For instance, in France, even during the time of Napoleon, those who did not own property, men who did not own property and women were not included, were not given the right to vote. In the sense, there was no universal suffrage. So that whole idea of universal adult franchise didn't really exist, barring very, very intermittently when it was only in the when Jacobins were in power, that even not property owning men were allowed. But other than that, in France, it wasn't the case. So it was only in the 20th century that the whole concept of universal suffrage gained traction. In the 19th century, that still wasn't the case. That is about how liberalism is looked at from a political standpoint. Now we come to the economic sphere. Now in the economic sphere, liberalism is largely inspired by the ideals of an economist called Adam Smith. Now Adam Smith claimed that there should be a free market economy, and we all see that around us today. But its genesis also happened in the 18th and 19th century, when the idea was that government should not impose any restrictions, and people should be allowed to carry out trade in a free society, in the sense that there is something within everyone. If they are able to put their skills out, the private ownership is encouraged. In that manner, an economy can grow. That was the main idea. Now, was this possible in Europe in the 19th century? If you take the example of Germany, there were a total of 39 states, and if a trader had to travel from one place to another, he had to, number one, encounter a lot of tariffs, and he had to pay a lot of tariffs, and there were a lot of tariff barriers, in the sense that whenever he had to travel from one area to another, a lot of tolls were also charged. Number two, that the toll that he would pay in one area would differ from the other, in the sense that there was not any single currency. They all differed across regions, and this was a big hindrance for any trader. Now, this was a demand of the middle class in the 19th century, that let's eliminate all these barriers and create a unified system. And that's exactly what happened. In 1834, a customs union called the Zollverein came into being. Now, what did this Zollverein imply? It brought down, it removed all tariff barriers, number one, and it brought down the currencies from 30. Imagine there were 30 currencies before, and the traders would have to negotiate as they move past, to only 2. So only 2 currencies existed at that time. So that is how, the people began to feel that, okay, now there is a sense of economic unity between all of us. Alongside, another major development was that railways gradually emerged, and these trains began connecting people from different regions altogether. So that's how connections also evolved. And this is another reason why nationalism gained importance in the 19th century. 1815 is an important year in world history, as it was the year when the Battle of Waterloo was fought and Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated by a coalition of forces. Now, these coalition of forces were headed by a few powers like Britain, Russia, Austria and Prussia, and all of them came up together immediately after this war and met at Vienna and drew up a settlement. Now, this settlement was primarily to go back to a conservative regime. Now, what is the meaning of conservatism? Conservative ideology implies having faith in traditional ideologies and institutions, right? And that naturally means traditional hierarchies as well. So, in Europe, it meant going back to the idea of church, monarchy, and other institutions that come by. So, these people, they drew up a settlement and revived all the systems that had been deposed and kind of sidelined by Napoleon. And this firstly included the revival of the Bourbon dynasty. Secondly, France was deprived of all the territories that it had acquired under Napoleon's aegis. You also had Netherlands that was formed towards the north. Genoa, which is in present-day Italy, was also given a place in south. You had Austria that began to show its power. You had Prussia that gained a lot of territories. You had in the east of Europe Russia taking on Poland, and Prussia going on to occupy Saxony. Now Saxony is in East Germany. If you look at present day, it's in east of Germany. That is where it was occupied by Prussia. So in this way, the idea was to go back to a conservative order. And alongside, what happened was that the voices of people were stifled. So there was dissent was curbed, and there was a lot of censorship, in the sense that people were not allowed to given the freedom to express themselves. Naturally, this was against the idea of liberalism, and the fault line between conservative ideology and liberal ideology only widened. In this manner, the liberals began to take the initiative at deposing this new conservative order that had come up immediately after the Battle of Waterloo. We'll look into that. The revolutionaries of Europe played a massive role in raising the morale of people to achieve the end of evolving nation states. Now, they were staunchly opposed to monarchical forms of government and believed in the ideas of liberalism and equality. To the extent that they worked not underground literally means they dug down and they worked over there. They worked in secrecy, and they carried out their activities in such a manner that the government remained oblivious to them. Right? One such worker, one such Italian revolutionary was Giuseppe Mazzini. Now, he believed that God had intended nation states to be, and he believed that we must go all out to ensure that all forms of monarchy should be abolished, and all these different small states and patchment of states that have been created that was actually part of Italy. They all spoke Italian languages. They all had to be united to form one comprehensive Italian whole. And to that extent, he went on to forge two groups. One was Young Italy and the other was Young Europe. And this is what motivated people. It encouraged people. It gave them that inner zeal to move forward to achieve their goals. And they were of course opposed by those who were the conservatives. For instance, Duke Metternich, who was heading the Vienna Congress. He called Mazzini the most dangerous enemy of our social order. In that manner, gradually the blood of people began to boil, and that's when they rose against oppressive government. Now, restricting the history of revolutionaries to just a minute and speaking about them for only a few paragraphs and all that won't do justice to the real volume of work that they have accomplished. So I will be making more videos on revolutionaries not only from Europe but also from India. Now, it will surprise you, and today in this one, in hashtag course correction, there is one freedom fighter, one of our freedom fighters, who actually wrote a Marathi treatise on the works of Giuseppe Mazzini. He took a lot of inspiration from Mazzini and started off India's first secret society in the beginning of the 20th century. Now, this was called as Abhinav Bharat Society. Now, please think about it, do some research, and put down the name of this social reformer and revolutionary down below in the comments. I have given a lot of clues to you, but I like to have you all give me his name. He's someone who has played a wonderful and an unparalleled role in the quest of our freedom. So, request you to put down his names, and if you have any suggestions, I will be putting in more videos in the next part. Subsequent parts would come by. If you have any suggestions, any questions, feel free to comment or approach me on Instagram. Do follow me on Instagram as well. My handle anirudh.naveen.0305, and I look forward to staying in touch with you and putting out regular videos this time. Thank you so much. Namaskaram. Jai Hind.